Before I even begin, let me just say, if you think quiet afternoons in the kitchen never turn into something unforgettable, think again. What happened when my neighbor's grown son knocked on my door that day still makes my heart beat a little faster, even now. If you're new here, tell me which city you're watching from. I love picturing where everyone is listening from. And if you enjoy stories that feel like a friend whispering secrets across the table, well, don't forget to tap that like button and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Now, let me take a breath and step back into that moment. The day started like any other. I had just turned 60 a few months earlier, and although I try to say the number casually, the truth is it settles on me sometimes like warm sunlight, sometimes like a weight. That afternoon the sunlight was definitely on the warm side, spilling across my kitchen counter as I sliced tomatoes for a simple salad. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of hush that comes after lunch when everyone settles into their own worlds. I wasn't expecting anyone, least of all Daniel, my neighbor's son. He's 32, polite in a way men his age aren't always, and tall enough that I always have to tilt my chin up the slightest bit when he speaks to me. He'd grown up next door, moved away for years, and only recently returned to help his mother after her knee surgery. I still thought of him as the boy who used to ride his bike too fast down the street, but every now and then I'd catch a glimpse of the man he'd become, and the image would shift, unexpected and unsettling in its own way. I was wiping tomato juice off my fingers when I heard the knock, firm but not hurried. For a moment I just stood there, dish towel in hand, feeling that strange intuition that sometimes whispers before your mind catches up. I don't know why, but something about the sound made me straighten my back and smooth my hair before heading to the door. When I opened it, Daniel was standing there with the late son behind him, his expression somewhere between sheepish and concerned. He held a toolbox in one hand, and I remember thinking how out of place it looked, as if he'd grabbed the first thing he saw before coming over. "Hi, Miss Carter," he said, giving a small, awkward smile. "Sorry to bother you. I actually needed a favor." I laughed softly and waved him inside, telling him for the 100th time to call me by my first name. He stepped in, glancing around my kitchen the way people do when they're trying not to reveal what they're really thinking. I could sense something weighing on him, something unsaid. It wasn't tension exactly, more like a heaviness he was trying to hold by himself. The air between us felt different that day, thicker somehow, and I wondered briefly if he sensed it too. He placed the toolbox on the counter, but didn't open it. Instead, he leaned against the edge, running a hand through his hair in a way that reminded me of his father at that age. The gesture tugged at something in me I didn't expect, an old familiarity, a quiet understanding. "I didn't come to fix anything," he finally admitted. "I just needed to talk to someone." There was sincerity in his voice that caught me off guard, so raw it momentarily softened everything around us. I motioned for him to sit at the small kitchen table, the one that had so many years of conversations woven into its wood, some joyful, some painful, all real. He hesitated, then sat. I could feel his eyes following my movements as I poured 2 glasses of water, hands steady though I wasn't entirely sure why they needed to be. When I sat across from him, he let out a breath that seemed like it had been waiting for hours. "My mom and I had a fight," he began quietly. "A bad one. I didn't know where else to go." His words weren't dramatic or loud. They were simple, but they carried years of buried frustration. I nodded, letting the silence make room for his honesty. He continued slowly, talking about the pressure he felt, how returning home had stirred things he thought he'd outgrown. There was vulnerability in his eyes, a mix of confusion and strength, and as he spoke I found myself leaning in, not out of curiosity but empathy. We talked for a long while. At one point he laughed softly, shaking his head, and the shift in his expression warmed the room in a way the sunlight couldn't quite manage. He told me he appreciated how easy it was to talk to me, that I had a way of listening that made things feel clearer. I felt a quiet flutter inside, unexpected, gentle, nothing I'd name out loud. And then there was a moment, a small one, but unmistakable. He looked up at me, holding my gaze longer than habit would excuse. His eyes softened, searching for something in my expression. I don't know what I gave him, but whatever it was made him exhale as if he'd found it. Nothing inappropriate happened, not even close, but something shifted. A thread pulled taut between two people who hadn't expected to feel anything at all in that ordinary kitchen. When he finally stood to leave, the room felt strangely altered, as if it had absorbed everything we'd shared and was holding it quietly in its corners. He paused at the door, glanced back at me, and said softly, "Thanks for being here. I didn't realize how much I needed it." I smiled, wishing him a calm night and a clear mind, but after the door closed, I stood there for a long moment, realizing that I, too, felt something I hadn't expected, a gentle stirring, a reminder that connection can find us at any age, in the simplest moments. And that was only the beginning. I didn't sleep much that night, not because anything dramatic had happened, but because something subtle had awakened inside me, the way a soft breeze lifts a curtain you thought was closed for good. I kept replaying Daniel's expression as he stood in my doorway, grateful, vulnerable, almost relieved. At 60, you'd think moments like that wouldn't catch you off guard anymore, but they still do, sometimes more than ever. The next morning I moved around my kitchen with an unusual awareness, noticing little things I normally overlooked. The faint citrus scent from the cleaner I'd used the night before. The way the sunlight rested on the floorboards. Even the quiet felt different, as though the room remembered every word Daniel and I had shared and was holding them gently in the air. Around 10, while I was reorganizing a cabinet I absolutely did not need to reorganize, I heard another knock. This one lighter, hesitant. My breath caught in a way that surprised me, as if my body knew before my mind did. When I opened the door, there he was again. Daniel stood on the porch with his hands in his pockets, shoulders slightly hunched like he wasn't sure if he should stay or turn around. His eyes lifted to mine, and the careful smile he gave me tugged something deep in my chest. "Morning," he said. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything." I stepped aside, motioning him in before he could change his mind. As he walked past, I caught a faint scent of fresh laundry and something warm, maybe cedar. It made him seem steadier than he looked. I wasn't sure if he'd want company today, he admitted once we settled back at the kitchen table, but I just felt like talking again. There was no bravado in his voice, no expectation, only honesty. I appreciated it more than I could say. I made tea this time. He watched me move around the kitchen, the way younger people do when they're trying to understand older ones, not judging but curious. When I placed his cup in front of him, our hands brushed lightly. It was nothing, really, barely more than a passing warmth, but my heart gave a small, traitorous skip anyway. For a while he didn't speak. He just wrapped his fingers around the cup, staring into the steam as if it told a story he wasn't sure how to begin. "It was worse this morning," he finally said. "Mom barely looked at me. I know she's hurting. I know I'm part of it. But every time I try to talk to her, it feels like we're standing on opposite sides of a wall neither of us built." I nodded. Sometimes distance grows in the small moments, not the big ones. He looked up, surprised. "Yes, exactly." We talked again about family, about expectations, about the quiet weight we sometimes carry without realizing how heavy it's become. He told me things he hadn't told anyone, his voice soft but steady. I listened the way I always have, with my whole attention, not just the parts of me that could respond. At one point he leaned back, rubbing the back of his neck. "You make it easier to breathe," he said quietly. The words settled between us, warm and sincere, neither rushed nor filtered. I felt them in a place I hadn't expected to feel anything for a long time. I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time I saw not the boy from next door, but the man he had grown into. A man searching for steadiness in a world that kept shifting under his feet. "You're kinder to yourself when you talk to me," I replied. "Maybe that's what you're really needing." His smile was small but real. "Maybe so." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the kind of silence that only exists when two people feel safe with each other. He glanced around my kitchen, eyes lingering on the little details, the framed photo of my son, the lemon-patterned dish towels, the vase of wilted daisies I still hadn't replaced. "You know," he said, "this house always felt warm when I was a kid, like it had a heartbeat. It still does." That startled me more than it should have. I had spent years maintaining this place alone, trying to keep it from feeling empty. Hearing him say that made something inside me unclench. When he rose to leave, he hesitated again at the door. His hand brushed the frame, his eyes lingering on mine. Something unspoken moved between us, but it wasn't inappropriate, and it wasn't confusing. It was simply human. Two people standing close enough to feel the warmth of understanding. "I might come by again later," he said softly. "If that's all right." "It's all right," I answered. And it was. More than all right. After he left, I touched my fingers lightly to the handle of the door, feeling the echo of the moment. I wasn't expecting anything from him. I wasn't even sure what the feeling inside me meant yet, but it had been a long time since someone's presence made the quiet parts of my life feel seen. And somehow, I knew this wasn't the last time I'd hear that gentle knock. The days that followed carried a quiet rhythm I hadn't anticipated. Daniel started coming over more often, though never intrusively. Each visit began the same way: a hesitant knock, a warm smile, a careful step across my threshold. There was a subtle tension in the air, not the kind that makes you anxious, but the kind that keeps you fully present, alert to the smallest shifts in someone's expression or tone. I found myself noticing things I hadn't before: how his hands moved when he spoke, the slight lift of an eyebrow when he hesitated, the way the sunlight caught his hair just so in the morning. One afternoon, I was kneeling on the kitchen floor, arranging a new set of spices on the bottom shelf, when I heard the familiar knock. I expected him to call out, but he didn't. When I straightened and opened the door, he was holding a basket of fresh vegetables from the farmer's market. "I thought you might like these," he said, voice casual but tinged with something deeper. "I remembered you said you liked the heirloom tomatoes last week." I felt a warmth spread through me, not just from the gesture, but from the way he remembered small details, details that made me feel genuinely seen. I invited him in, insisting he stay for tea, though I already knew he would. As we sat, the conversation meandered from light topics, recipes, the changing weather, small neighborhood gossip, to heavier ones. Daniel's voice was steady as he spoke about his mother, his responsibilities, the pressure he felt trying to bridge the distance between who he was and who he wanted to be. There was a vulnerability there, a trust, that made me handle my own words with care. "I don't know why I keep coming here," he admitted at one point, almost embarrassed. "Maybe because it's easier to breathe when I talk to you." I looked at him and smiled gently. We all need a place where we can just exhale. The simplicity of that truth seemed to hang in the room between us. We shared a quiet laugh, one that had nothing to do with jokes and everything to do with relief. He wasn't expecting anything from me, and I wasn't expecting anything from him. And yet there was an undeniable connection, a thread of understanding that had woven itself between us over these visits. Later, I found myself in the living room, absent-mindedly straightening the cushions, when Daniel came over to help me with a small task, hanging a picture I'd never quite had the courage to put up alone. As we worked side by side, our hands brushing occasionally, I felt the stirrings of a deeper awareness. The room seemed to hold its breath, echoing the quiet intimacy of two people moving in harmony without words. When the picture was finally straight, he stepped back and studied it, then turned to me. His expression softened, almost reverent. "You make this place feel alive," he said, voice low, almost shy, like it's waiting for something good to happen. Something in me ached at his words, not with longing, but with recognition. It was true. I had carried this house, my life, for so long, holding space for memories and responsibilities, rarely noticing how much it had waited for connection. And now, unexpectedly, it had arrived in the form of this young man, someone I had known since he was a boy, who had grown into a man capable of opening my heart in ways I hadn't anticipated. We lingered in that moment longer than necessary, not because we needed to say anything, but because the quiet between us had become meaningful. Finally, he straightened and walked toward the door, lingering at the threshold. I could sense the hesitation, the unspoken acknowledgement of what these moments had come to mean. "I'll see you tomorrow?" he asked softly, almost a question to himself. "Yes," I replied without hesitation. "I'll be here." As the door closed behind him, I rested my hand against it, savoring the echo of his presence. My heart felt lighter, yet fuller than it had in years. I realized then that connection, true, honest, human connection, doesn't always arrive when you expect it. Sometimes it knocks quietly, cautiously, and you only notice it when you're willing to pause, to open the door, to listen. And I knew, deep down, that the rhythm of our visits, the gentle unfolding of trust and understanding, was only just beginning. The following weeks unfolded in a quiet, almost imperceptible rhythm. Daniel's visits became a gentle part of my days, each knock at the door carrying a sense of anticipation I hadn't realized I still felt at 60. Not excitement in a reckless way, but a warmth, a sense of being noticed, of being understood. There was a calm intimacy in our conversations, a rhythm that didn't need forcing, only presence. One late afternoon, I was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping tea, the light outside soft and golden, when I heard that familiar knock. This time, I didn't pause. I knew it was him. When I opened the door, he was standing there, hands empty, shoulders relaxed, but with that subtle energy that always seemed to hum between us. "Mind if I stay a while?" he asked, a slight smile tugging at his lips. "Not at all," I replied, stepping aside. We moved to the living room this time, where the afternoon sun slanted across the carpet, casting long shadows and painting the room in gentle hues. For a while, we sat in companionable silence, each of us aware of the other, yet content to let the moment simply exist. Eventually, Daniel began to speak, softly at first, about small things, how he was adjusting to being back in town, the quiet victories and little frustrations of everyday life. I listened, absorbing the cadence of his voice, the way he carefully chose his words. Then, gradually, our conversation shifted. He started talking about dreams, regrets, and hopes he hadn't shared with anyone else. I found myself sharing too, opening pieces of my own life that I hadn't spoken of in years. Stories of my past, the fears I had once carried, the joys I had long tucked away. There was no judgment, no pretense, only an exchange of honesty that felt rare and precious. At one point, he reached over and placed a hand near mine on the arm of the chair. Not touching, not crossing any line, just presence. The gesture was gentle, deliberate, and it conveyed a trust that needed no words. I felt a warmth spread through me, a quiet affirmation that what we were building, this connection, this shared space, was real, human, and deeply meaningful. Time seemed to stretch, each moment rich with awareness. The house, my kitchen, the living room, even the sunlight felt alive with this new understanding. Daniel spoke of feeling seen, of feeling heard, and I realized, with a bittersweet clarity, that I too had been craving that same acknowledgement. It wasn't romance or passion in the conventional sense. It was something more enduring, more honest. It was the affirmation that even at this stage in life, meaningful connections could emerge, unanticipated and profound. As the afternoon waned, Daniel stood to leave. There was a pause at the door, that familiar hesitation, but now it was paired with a quiet confidence. He looked at me and said softly, "Thank you for being here, for letting me be here." I smiled, my chest full in a way that words couldn't fully capture. "And thank you, Daniel, for trusting me." He stepped out into the fading light, and I watched him walk down the path, a sense of calm and clarity settling over me. The house felt different now, not just a space to live, but a vessel of connection, memory, and the kind of unexpected joy that makes ordinary life remarkable. Later that evening, I sat by the window, reflecting on everything that had happened over these past weeks. Life, I realized, had a way of surprising you when you thought all the meaningful moments had passed. It could arrive gently, in the form of a knock on the door, a shared cup of tea, or a conversation that left you feeling lighter and more alive than you had in years. And I understood something fundamental. The heart never stops discovering, never stops growing, no matter the age. What had begun as a simple, unexpected visit had become a reminder that connection, respect, and the courage to be open could transform even the quietest corners of life into something extraordinary. I smiled to myself, the evening air soft against my skin. And though Daniel had left, the presence of our shared moments lingered, a quiet pulse of warmth that promised more days of conversation, understanding, and the kind of companionship that nourishes the soul. Life, I realized, was still full of surprises, and sometimes the best ones came when you simply opened the door.